Well, good afternoon. My name is Lee Butch, and I'm a director at AVAP. Welcome to our second webinar in our summer chat series, Agility Through Uncertainty. Today, we're going to hear from Mike Anderson, who's an Associate VP for Enterprise Applications and Enterprise Project Director at Ohio State University. AVAP's Director, Adam Wilson, will be leading the conversation today. Adam is a proven portfolio program manager with a focus on project delivery, system integration, solution design, and implementing business process and information technology change. He has experience delivering projects leveraging traditional and agile methodologies and works with a multitude of different technologies and enterprise applications. And over the last 20 years, he successfully delivered solutions across industries, including retail, banking, and higher education. So Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you. We can get started.
Great. Thanks, Lee, for the introduction. It's my pleasure to have Mike Anderson alongside me today, although it be virtually. Mike has over 12 years experience in higher education, leading digital transformation projects and teams. He's a skilled program manager and a ProSci certified change practitioner. He is currently the Associate Vice President for Enterprise Applications at the Ohio State University. And he's held many roles at Ohio State along the way, such as Senior Systems Manager and Director of Technical Projects. Mike also carries a very important title of Project Director for the Enterprise Project at OSU, which is their full platform implementation of Workday at the university and health system. That program's scope includes human resources, payroll, supply chain management, and finance, and eventually student functionality. Over the years, Ohio State has been a great partner of AVAP. Interestingly enough, they were Navigator, which is now AVAP's actual first client back in 2001. And we still have the privilege of working with them today, and more recently on the Enterprise Project. So we're excited to talk to Mike today and learn a little bit about the project we have going on and how we've reacted to the COVID-19 pandemic. Mike, we'd like to get your perspective about leading remotely and adapting quickly to those unplanned environmental factors that impacted the university and health system during the pandemic. So if you could, maybe get in your time machine and go back to the February-March timeframe and talk to us a little bit about what phase we were in the project when the pandemic hit.
Thanks, Adam. I appreciate the intro and the kind words too. So when we first learned that the pandemic was going to, I guess, have an impact on our program, which was back in early March, late February, we were just starting to hit our stride, kind of with our change management activities really ramping up. As you mentioned before, I'm a big believer in the ProSci change management methodology. And so we've been applying that in our program, and we were really just starting to ramp up. We've gone through the awareness and desire kind of components of our change program, and we were just starting to really ramp up on the knowledge piece. And we were starting to kick off user acceptance testing, which with cloud solutions like Workday is a little different. It's more of a change management activity than testing, as you might expect, because you're doing a lot of training and teaching. So we just started ramping up user acceptance testing and really just started to make the big push on the communications front to engage with the broader university community. Up until this point, we've been pretty well focused on our internal stakeholders and people that are really engaged with the program day to day. So we were just starting to hit our stride and really ramp up for go live. So as you know, with Workday, we have the deployment phase, which thank you, you're leading for us on the program. And the deployment phase takes a little bit of time. It's not like flipping a switch. So closing out testing, ramping up deployment, and just really starting to pivot toward the go live, which was again slated for June and July.
Yeah, thanks for that background. Certainly never a good time in a project to experience something like we have with COVID-19 for sure. And absolutely not a good time when you're going into that testing and deployment phase and really trying to stabilize things, to be thrown a curveball and change. So talk to us a little bit about that shift and really realizing, you know, in a matter of probably weeks to a month or so, having a group of folks that had been for the majority of the project doing a lot of on-site co-location collaboration, and now all of a sudden they had to move to more of a remote working model for really an unknown period of time. It wasn't like, okay, in 3 weeks we're going to be through this. It's really handling that unknown and coming up with the plan. Can you talk to us a little bit as a leader what your thoughts were around that?
I think it was a really fluid situation for the first few weeks. I think in early March, you know, we had kind of gotten the idea that, hey, this has potential to cause a lot of ripples to our program, and we needed to start thinking about how we were going to do things differently. So I would say in that first week, you know, we started like, what are some of the activities that we need to plan for to be able to do remotely and still be able to deliver on our schedule? And we knew that we were going to have to change the way that we delivered and produced user acceptance testing, you know, so how are we going to do training? And our first initial thought was, all right, well, there's going to be a handful of things that we're going to have to do remotely. Certainly did not anticipate the entire team needing to be remote, or the entire organization. Ohio State, for the most part, the stakeholders that we needed to engage with were also going to be remote. So I think that initial wave of uncertainty, and then the fluid situation that we were going through, we were getting new information almost on a daily basis that had the potential to change what our plans were going to be. So I think being able to digest that and be able to make decisions without perfect information was probably the most challenging thing early on, you know, before we had, you know, full direction from the university about what the work situation was going to be. When it was kind of on us to figure out what the impacts were going to be to the program, that was a tough time.
Certainly, and I think, you know, you had mentioned shifting maybe some of the mediums in which we conducted meetings, especially moving to more like virtual remote setting like this. I know for me personally, I find it harder to lead a meeting or session like this without being able to read the room, right? Is your message getting across? You know, are they picking up what you're trying to convey? Things like that. As a leader, how do you keep your team engaged and make sure you're visible in this new remote world?
Well, I think, you know, just like everybody else who's joining this call, we were fortunate that we had spent a lot of time together before the situation hit. So the relationships were there. We had strong relationships already between, you know, our project leadership team and the executive leaders and our stakeholders. So when this happened, we were able to kind of carry forward on those and lean on those a little bit and know that those relationships were already established. I think that if we were starting from scratch right now, I would probably put a lot more programs in place to make sure to get, you know, to find a way to build those relationships going into a program. I think, you know, for us being able to engage and just being intentional and making the most of the time that you do have face-to-face is important. You know, and it might not be face-to-face where we have a full group, but, you know, being able to leverage the technology and turn our cameras on is one of the first ways that I would say one of the ways that we can connect with each other. I personally would call into meetings a lot. We had already kind of had that culture where we could, you know, and the university's huge, so a lot of times we need to call in to a meeting when you can't make it across campus to be there. But I personally never turned the video on until I realized that it actually makes a difference. You know, being able to see your face and respond as we have a conversation is so important. I think, you know, some things like, it might sound silly, but doing virtual happy hours or just spending some time and maybe trying to connect. I was sharing with one of my teammates earlier today. I think I've seen more streaming concerts since this started than live concerts that I got to see in an entire year. So just finding ways like that to connect with folks that know that they're going through the same kind of thing that you are, and trying to find that common ground and understanding is really important. And to do that, you've got to put in some time and effort. It's not just just as easy as being able to do the drive-by at work and have a conversation at the coffee machine, or so being intentional and really setting aside time to connect with the leadership team one-on-one in addition to our weekly meeting is really important to me.
That's helpful, Mike. I appreciate you sharing that. One of the things you'd mentioned previously as part of this conversation was organizational change management and the ProSci methodology. I know AVAP's organizational change management team has trained a lot of your team on the ProSci methodology. Is there anything you can share that maybe you've leveraged from that methodology as you work through this time?
Yeah, I think one of the byproducts of that methodology is helping give people a framework to think about how they digest change for themselves. So I think probably one of the biggest benefits of having so many of our team members participate in that is that it helped prepare them to accept change and be willing to change, because in the middle of a pandemic is not the time that you want to put a plan together and decide that you want to be, a change leader and be agile. Building those skills and the resilience leading up to that is what made us successful. I feel like when we were able to pivot quickly and implement a change in our project plan to be able to deliver remotely, we wouldn't have been able to do that if we didn't have people that were willing to change on our team. And I think giving them a framework like they did with ProSci and with the agile model, it gave them a framework to help process things and be willing to change and be resilient through this. So it was not met with resistance. It was met with, how do we find a path forward and figure this thing out, because that's what we do. So I think prepping us for that is probably one of the biggest benefits. And it helped us build the right culture in our organization to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mike. I mean, it's really, it's being, have the toolkit to be able to work through change, no matter what that change is, right? Whether it be an organizational change or even something such as a pandemic we have to pivot through. When I think about organizational change, one of the things that seems to be key in a lot of things in being successful is around communication. And we talked about a little bit about pivoting to being more remote, but was there anything specifically that you implemented from a communication perspective to make sure that, I mean, you've got a pretty large project team, hundreds of people, to make sure that you're connecting with them and they have a good conduit as we're working remote to know, they still are connected to the larger project?
Yeah, so one of the things we've done since going remote, as you know, you've been on our program for a while, we have a pretty good rewards and recognition program. And we brought our team members together once a month, once a quarter, to do kind of an all team meeting where our executive sponsors would engage and maybe we do some team awards. But because our team is so big and so distributed, we didn't do that very often, right? We brought them together maybe monthly, maybe quarterly. And we've kind of turned the tides a little bit and started doing a weekly all team call. So every Thursday morning, we had one this morning. Every Thursday we kind of have, it's an all team call. Sometimes there's a little bit of an agenda. The main thing that we want to do is just give a forum for people on the team to come together and kind of work through some of the issues that are going on, and make sure that they understand that they are part of a larger team and they do have a support network that's there for them. I think, sorry, my coworker over here just woke up from his nap. So
it's a good point to be agile, right, and adapt to change. You never know.
Exactly, absolutely. So giving people kind of an open area, an open space, open office hours almost to come together to be able to share, how they're feeling, how they're processing, tips and tricks with each other was important, and giving them and making that weekly and not necessarily a mandatory thing was also kind of a way that we ramped up the cadence so that people had that support network. I think that's been helpful. And then, of course, really kind of changing all of our, again, like what I shared earlier, I didn't used to turn the video on for phone calls and things like that, but doing that in all of the meetings now, and moving from, to Zoom, so that you can share with the whole team all at once, is kind of nice. So when we have our team meetings, it's nice. I can see the entire group all at once on Zoom. It's much better to be able to do that. I actually am a little worried when we do go back to the office that that it might not be as effective in some of those meetings, even though you have the room and you can read the room and it's better like that. Everybody's not then on the same playing field. So I kind of like the remote meetings sometimes. Sorry.
Yeah, Mike, you mentioned. Mike, you mentioned some of those meetings that we've been hosting as a program weekly, and some of the benefits of doing it remote. I can certainly echo some of the benefits to that. I think early on the meetings, there was always a safe space to encourage collaboration and get not only kudos across the project, but also express if there were any questions or call outs or things that people didn't quite understand. They gave them that forum to get those out. And if one person had a question, I'm sure that others had that as well. But I would say, as we've been running those weekly, I think people are feeling more comfortable either typing into the chat or speaking out and getting their questions out there, which I think has been a nice positive side effect, which is, that is a little different than we've done the meetings in person. Sometimes people are a little more passive and reluctant to speak in a large group, whereas, when they're doing it via conference call or Zoom chat, they're more comfortable. So that's a positive change as well.
This is a positive. And I think just kind of to build on that a little bit, I think being willing to see the silver lining in some of these things is also the attitude that you need to have, right? It's not ideal. We didn't choose to work this way, and we certainly would not have, I don't think there's a tabletop exercise anywhere that would have said, hey, let's plan for the pandemic and see how that's going to work in the middle of probably the biggest change project ever at Ohio State. But we do have to find the silver linings and make the best out of those situations, so that we can keep positive and move forward. So I think, seeing the silver linings in those kind of things, seeing the opportunity, like what we shared before, we cut down our commute. So that's a little bit more time that we have to be ourselves and not necessarily, spend it in front of the computer, but spend it with your family and spend it with, find the positives in any of those situations is all we can do.
That's great advice. So on the flip side of that, and thinking about working remote and staying agile, as a leader, I've tried to schedule meetings with Mike before. I can attest that he's a very busy guy, and his day starts early and ends late. And I know for a lot of folks, one of the shifts in working remote and is really making sure that they do have that disconnection point and decompression. So the thing I would ask you as a leader and really thinking about your team and staying agile and fresh, is there anything that you've incorporated to kind of create those boundaries?
I think, in any of the interactions we have, we legitimately ask people, how they're doing and actually care what their answers are. I think that's probably one of the most important things, and give people space to process and how they're feeling. Some of the tips that I've shared, and I'm not really good at it today because, as I mentioned, I was working from my bedroom. That's not a good spot to normally have that. If you can be in an office at home, or if you can create an environment when you're working remotely where you have the ability to close the door after you walk away from the end of the day, to kind of leave it behind you and create some separation, I think is a great idea. And being able to kind of, what I was sharing with you earlier is I used to love that. I kind of had a pretty decent commute to and from work. In the morning, I'd take advantage of it, like you said, and we'd have some phone calls or get things out of the way to start the day. But on the way home, it was kind of a decompression time. So I kind of missed that. And so creating some decompression time and finding some opportunities to, to close the door behind you, to separate yourself from the day is really important. And you have to be intentional about it. It's not going to happen if you just let it. If you think it's going to happen naturally, you're going to be sitting in front of your computer for 12 hours. And and next thing you know, you look up and it's like, oh, I didn't even have to see the sun today, right? I just got to work all day. And so I think just stepping outside, taking a breath of fresh air, there's lots of little things that you can kind of incorporate throughout your day to take a break and disconnect and stay sane. And it's really important to create space for us to be able to do those things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things I was thinking about, the pandemic, and we talked a little bit about it already, certainly some changes that will likely stick around long after we move past COVID-19. In my personal life, there's some things that I think are positives. I mean, we were already doing in my household a lot of the curbside checkout and using some of the online mobile apps and things like that. But certainly seeing a quick increase in the technology that's out there to make things quicker, more efficient for folks, whether it be the QR codes at restaurants so you can get quicker takeout, like I mentioned, the grocery stores, or even the more reliance on e-commerce and getting things delivered to your door. Some of those things will likely stick around, I'm sure, and they're positives. As you reflect back on some of the changes you've seen in the last 2 to 3 months, either it be in higher ed or technology, or even how you manage a program like the Enterprise Project, what are some of those things that, this situation has brought out that you think you'll incorporate in the future or will stick around?
Well, I think probably one of the most impactful is, and we haven't seen this yet because we're still in the midst of it, but when this is over, I'm wondering what our workforce, the draw from, I guess, the area from which we have to draw from to fill open positions is going to change, right? I think we've seen that already where, maybe that 90-mile radius, you and I were joking earlier, we have kind of long commutes, but we're still within pretty decent radius of campus in Columbus and make it to work, within a relatively decent amount of time. But are we going to be open to, maybe fill in some positions with people that are even further remote? What's that look like from a skills inventory? Does that really broaden things up for us and make the right candidate not necessarily tied to a location? Is there opportunity there? I think, tactically, we were in the midst of user acceptance testing on the project when this hit, and we had to change the way that we were delivering user acceptance testing, and we moved to using Zoom, and we moved to classroom breakout sessions. And we didn't plan it that way, so we weren't the most efficient at it. But now that we've done it, and we could maybe go in eyes wide open and plan to do user acceptance testing remotely, that might be a new trend that we might be able to start taking advantage of, especially on projects where we're drawing participants from all over the organization. And we're asking a lot of them. If we needed somebody from our HR organization to participate in user acceptance testing, if we were on campus, it would have been, a minimum 3-hour ordeal. An hour to get in your car, drive over to Mount Hall on West Campus, participate in training, drive back, and then, go on the great hunt for a parking spot after the first stop in the morning, when everything's packed. So that would be a 3-hour ordeal that now we can deliver that same value to our clients or our customers in that hour. They can just call in, they can participate, we can be efficient and effective and still engaging in that user acceptance testing, but we can do it remotely. So I think that's tactically another thing that we'll take advantage of moving forward as we do additional releases.
That's some great points there. We do want to leave a minute or a couple of minutes for questions, but before we wrap up, just kind of reflecting back on the situation, what leadership skills did you acquire during this time of uncertainty and remote work that you'll carry forward?
I think probably one of the most important for me is we all have experienced this in different ways. And I think taking a moment and understanding before reacting where somebody's coming from and what their situation is. is probably going to be one of the most important takeaways for me coming out of this. Not just jumping right to the solution, but understanding really where they're coming from. And I know that's something that we should be doing all along, and that's obviously what a leaderful thing to do. But I think this has really driven it home for me and made it something that that I will always, reflect on. What is this person's situation that's going on outside of work that could be influencing, what they're saying to me at any given time? I think that's one of the big takeaways. And then the other is to make sure, kind of going back to a question that you had asked a little bit ago, making sure to give yourself space to process things, right? It's not the end of the world. And if you spent every minute in front of that computer engaged and didn't take time to worry about yourself or take a break and think about how things are affecting you, then, then it's going to pile up and the stress is going to become too much. So I think making space for yourself and knowing that, that you deserve to be able to take a step back and take a break and understand how things are affecting you is really important. And giving yourself time for that reflection is not selfish, but necessary.
Totally agree. Great advice. We do have, I think, 3 minutes, and we want to take a question or two if we can. So if anyone has any questions, they want to type it in the chat window, or Vanessa, if you've got any questions you'd like to throw out there with the final 3 minutes we have.
Yeah, thanks, Adam, and thank you, Mike. So yeah, like Adam said, feel free to send any questions in using the Q&A or the chat window. But we had a few come in during the presentation, so we'll just go ahead and get started. So the first question is, what was your biggest fear as a leader when you learned the whole team was going remote?
Wow, probably that we were going to have to deliver the same quality outcomes on the same timeline. As I mentioned before, we had kind of made the decision from a project perspective to start looking at what it was going to take to deliver in a remote environment on our then current schedule, which was June or July. So my big fear was not that we were not going to be able to deliver a product at the end of this project that was going to be usable, but it was that we were going to have to try to go through an adoption phase with a significant change like this remotely when we had not planned to do so. So especially given all of the other changes that were pulling and distractions that were pulling our stakeholders' attention. Right, we were part of our project is to replace the supply chain management tool at the Wexner Medical Center, and to do that in the midst of a pandemic, that caused me some heartburn, to be honest. So that was probably my biggest fear, is that we were going to be faced with that scenario.
Thanks, Mike. Looks like we just have 1 minute left, so we'll answer this last question. So this person asked, what type of infrastructure and online access did your team have when you went remote? Did everyone have a good home setup, and was all of your documentation in the cloud?
Oh, that's a great question. So when we did have to go remote, it was not, again, the end of times for us, because we did have a good tool set that was able to support us. So we use Box for online collaboration. We use Jira for project management and issue management. And both of those things were accessible and cloud-based. So that really helped us in the long run. Most of our team, we have a really large team. So I think at peak, we were close to 300 people on the program. Most of them had worked remotely at some point in time before we had to go remote. So most everybody had access already. If they didn't, the university was there to kind of help them find ways to support themselves with getting, high-speed internet and things like that. So no, we were pretty well prepared from a tools perspective, and we had already been using a lot of online cloud-based tools.
Great, thank you. Looks like that's all the time we have for questions today. So thank you so much, Mike.
You're welcome. Thanks very much. I really appreciate the opportunity. And thanks for the great discussion. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Anyone who registered today for the webinar will receive a recording. And also, you receive a link to register for next week's webinar with the University of Georgia. So appreciate you tuning in and listening, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.